This is it. This is it. This is our last class. Um, for most of you, at the end of class, we'll be saying goodbye. I know that four of you are continuing on, at least four that I know of. Hannah, Jaylene, Harrison, and Julia, right? And by the way, I think last class period, for some reason I had it in my mind that that the class was on Thursday. That is the semester 2 class, government class. But you guys were right. It is on Friday. It's a good thing I figured out before class started. So yeah, it is on Friday at 8 a.m., 8 a.m. to 9:30. So the reason I thought it was Thursday is because my section 2 class is on Thursday, and I was just thinking it was just continuing on from there. But no, it is Friday. I think I was also thinking that because the following year it's actually going to be on Thursday. But anyway, that's too much information. Yes, so it does continue on Friday, 8 a.m. So I will see half of you there next week. But anyway, I want to have a Jeopardy review to help you prepare for the test. But first, let's briefly review the video that you were supposed to watch for this class, and then we're going to wrap up our semester. So in the video you were supposed to watch, I talked about the Presidente. Is it on the 22nd or 29th? It is on the 29th. 29th. I talked about the president who may be the most underrated president of all time. Who did I say or suggest might hold the distinction of being our greatest president, and yet, that's right, he frequently ranks at the bottom of the list when Americans are polled as to who their favorite president is. And yes, it is Martin Van Buren. There he is. Should he be a new face for Mount Rushmore? So anyway, you saw that I spent some time talking about his presidency. I also talked a lot about his underlying worldview. What was his foundational worldview? Dutch Reformed, right, or AKA Calvinist, or AKA Biblical, right? So think about that for a second. How would adherence to Calvinism affect one's view of government? Calvin's your homeboy. You know, would one tend to favor more aggressive government or more limited government being a Calvinist? And I think Julia has given the reason why for the answer. So yeah, as Abby says, you would expect to have more of a limited view of government for the reason the belief in total depravity, man being sinful. You're going to want to limit the power of government because giving sinful man too much power is dangerous. You know, absolute power corrupts. Sorry, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, as Lord Acton said. And I have no idea who Lord Acton is. Actually, I think he was a legislator. Was it in Great Britain, I think? But I don't know. I really don't know anything about him other than he had a wonderful quote that is quoted a lot. Anyway, so with that in mind, how did Van Buren's underlying worldview specifically affect his presidency? What were some of the things that he favored, some of the initiatives that he pushed that just flowed from a limited view of government? And all these things would have come out of the DVD session that you watched. Looks like we're tapping the end of the well here. It's good to review these things because, you know, we got a test next week. You never know when it might come up, when you might get questions on this. So you mentioned, or we talked about already, favoring, or you mentioned limited government. Abby mentioned that. You might also remember that he favored lower taxes. He did support the militia. Good. That's right. He favored the militia and the right to keep and bear arms. He used the militia after the attack from Canada. Exactly. And using the militia is a quote-unquote small government approach. So that was an example. He also favored abiding by the Constitution and not doing things that the Constitution didn't allow, such as building roads, canals, things like that. So here again, let's see. Also because of the idea we serve a sovereign God who holds the sole form of authority, thus no man needs. Exactly. So actually, limited government and or total depravity and God's sovereignty are two Calvinistic ideas that heavily influence or would heavily influence somebody towards limited government. What years was he president? Wasn't it 28 to 32? Somebody check me on that. That would be 1828 to 1832, I think. But I'm going off memory there, so if somebody wants to Google that real quick. But obviously his, boy, I was off by 10 years. Thank you for checking that. Okay, 1837, 1841, or you might say the election of 1836. So Van Buren's starting worldview had a definite impact on how he governed. Had a definite impact on how he governed. When we started this semester, we studied the Founding Fathers' worldview. We saw that the founders grounded our nation on God's Word. Now, that's not to say that they were perfect, but Christianity was the established religion. Now, there was freedom of religion, to be sure, but you had to be a professing Christian to take office and a professing Christian to become a citizen. And this resulted in incredible freedom and prosperity. It makes me think of 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Doing everything for God's glory. That even covers the way you set up a government. And of course, while our founding fathers weren't perfect, it was very important for them to include and weave biblical principles into what they did. As John Quincy Adams said, the highest glory of the American Revolution was this. No, you're right, it wouldn't be allowed today. Was this. It connected in one indissoluble bond the principles of civil government with the principles of Christianity. And I think that's the reason America became so prosperous, is because there are blessings for following God. There are blessings for obeying His Word. I mean, that's true in our private lives, and it's true in our nation as well. Of course, as Daniel was alluding to, those foundations are under attack today in our schools, in our government, even in shopping stores, right, around Christmas time. You know how this is. Depending on where you live in the country, in many places, store clerks are told that they can't say Merry Christmas. Does that mean America can't redeem itself since it's... Well, that's not... Without a direct word from the Lord, I wouldn't say that you can definitively say that things can't be improved in this country. You definitely can't. I mean, in fact, we've seen in actually, like especially in African countries, they've gone from paganism and turned to Christianity. And I recognize that when you're in a downturn, it's easy to get frustrated and feel like you want to throw in the towel. And I would say our country, spiritually speaking, is in a downturn, obviously. However, look at the big picture. How much freedom was there on the earth when Jesus was sending out the 12 disciples? How much political, economic freedom was there? In the year 33 AD or thereabouts. Not much. Exactly right. Now, look at where we are today. I mean, so comparatively, freedom has grown. The mountain that Daniel talked about when he interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream, that stone cut without hands is going to become a mountain that fills the earth. Well, God's kingdom is spreading, and with it, it brings freedom. Now, What can be frustrating is at any one moment in time, you may be, let's say, in the United States, and you're seeing a decrease in freedom. And I grant you that's frustrating. But if you look at the big picture, that stone cut without hands is growing and growing and growing throughout the world. And so I think that should encourage us, you know, to not just think in terms of, you know, everything lives or dies, stands or falls with what happens to America. You know, I mean, it's not all just about us. It's really about God's kingdom throughout the earth. So anyway, that's maybe a little silver lining, actually a big silver lining of encouragement in the midst of the downturn that we see occurring before our eyes. You know, if you continue on, as 4 of you are in the Government 2 class that will start next Friday, not this Friday, we will study the whole separation of church and state thing a little more fully, how it developed in our country, what are the false arguments in favor of the separation of church and state, and what we can do as American citizens to combat this trend. So those are some of the things that we'll be looking at. We'll also look at that nagging question that I threw out there to you in classes before. Who was that president who gave an interview to a female reporter while he was skinny dipping in the Potomac River? The reporter actually sat on his clothes until he'd do the interview. So we'll talk about that. I'll take you through the life of the presidents. You'll actually get the rest of the story on Lincoln. Okay, he was not a vampire slayer. I don't know if any of you saw that movie. He was not a vampire slayer. Boy, that was a rough, scary movie. Whew, this is all next semester. But if you remember the Lincoln video, I told you that there was much more to come on Lincoln, and so you'll find out what it was that changed Lincoln's life so dramatically after he went through a severe depression following the death of a child. And so anyways, you leave this course, it's my hope that you've gotten a greater appreciation of what it means when we say that Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I mean, it means that God cares about more than just our private lives. I mean, that's important, but, you know, Jesus' kingship is about more than just our devotions, more than just our church, our families. I mean, obviously, he cares about those things. Julia intends to go into media. Oh, boy. Lord help us. Anyway, he does care about all these things, including the media. But because he's Lord over all, including all governments, it's incumbent upon us as citizens in our country to work and pray that Jesus would be honored as the king that he is. I mean, that means that we've got to evangelize the lost. But we also need to teach everything that Christ taught, and that's what Jesus said in his Great Commission. We need to share what he taught about government and how it's limited in its authority, and work to rein in a government that, like the Caesar in Rome, thinks that it's a god that can do whatever it wants. I mean, that's pretty much how government thinks today, at least in this country. Those that don't support limited government just think they can do whatever needs to be done. You know, but it's very dangerous when a government starts to act like Caesar. You know, take a more modern country like Nazi Germany. Hitler thought of himself in the sense of being a Caesar, in that, you know, he did whatever he thought needed to be done. In his case, it was committing great atrocities, genocide, to make a better society. So did the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Remember that? They did whatever they thought was best in order to change and reshape society. And it didn't matter if it involved murdering millions. But see, that's the danger of not having a biblical standard. That's the danger of not following God's word when there is no standard. That's why we need God's word so badly in our lives and in our country as well. So with that said, let me just wrap up my sort of last class encouragement to you. You know, number one, people need to know about the things that you've been learning this semester. They need to hear the principles of freedom that God has given us in his word. But number two, we need to teach others, especially Christians, that civil government has limited authority from God, And so government has to live within its means and live within the limits that God has defined. So, this is something that we should be active in doing, and it's something that we should be praying for. And I would add one more thing. It all starts by being on our knees in prayer. I mean, it would be wonderful, and this gets back to the earlier comment question, can our country change? I mean, we've had revivals in our country before where we were uh, turning away from God, and there's already been at least two big revivals in our country. Well, we should pray for that, that our country would turn back to God, and for our government to stop trying to act as God and let God be God, right? So that would be a good thing to be praying for. Julia says true, but for all our concerns for Christendom, there's also a growing split among our generation between kids that are incredibly liberal and do not care at all for biblical precepts or truths, and those who are conservative and are desperate to learn more about our founding and this blessing we have been given. Because of the atheistic apathy of the former, there are many in our generation who are being turned to the latter. So there's more hope than we ever might think. Yeah, great point. I think as people experience that's interesting. Your brother sees that a lot as a college student. As people experience the, how should I put it, the emptiness, either personally or collectively as a country, the emptiness of doing things without the Lord uses that to draw people to himself. So anyway, good stuff, good discussion. Any other thoughts or questions on this? Yeah, it's rough when there's no purpose. Absolutely. Well, without further ado, let's talk then about how to prepare for the final exam. The final exam is all about true, false, and multiple choice questions. You should be familiar with the readings in the book, chapters 6 through 12. Okay, so it's only on chapters 6 through 12 and the corresponding classes that go with it. So you don't have to worry about 1 through 5, okay? You should be familiar with the constitutional provisions in those chapters, okay, just like on your midterm exam. Note, there will be a few questions on the Bill of Rights, but for the most part, if you have read the Constitution and outlined it in Appendix B or the copies that you made or printed out, you should not be worried about the questions relating to the constitutional provisions you were required to read. So to prioritize your time, you should be especially familiar with the constitutional provisions that were actually mentioned in the text of each chapter. In other words, those bolded areas. So the Bill of Rights and those bolded areas quoting the Constitution, those would be the things that I would definitely focus on. Bring a copy of the Constitution with the text. Class notes. You should also review. So look at the PowerPoints, or I guess I should say your PDF. They look like PowerPoints, but they're PDF documents. Take special note of biblical passages and principles. I won't test you on the news articles that are in the PowerPoints. Again, those are just to illustrate certain principles, but any historical item or biblical passage from the notes, you definitely want to take a look at carefully. And DVD number 5 on Martin Van Buren. So if you haven't seen it, it'd be good to see it. Now, in terms of the Bible questions, I mean, it's going to be just like in the midterm exam. You might see something like this, where you get a multiple choice section. So for something like this, you would, I'm not requiring you to memorize the passages, but just to be familiar with the passage. So for example, you would know, even if you didn't have John 3:16 memorized, you would know that John 3:16 is C, shows that people will perish apart from Jesus Christ. Or Genesis 1 is A, shows that the world was created by God, etc. Let's see. So Abby, I think I answered your question. There's not a test on the first chapters. It starts with chapter 6. Let's see. You didn't turn in your letter. You did put some different to Nice, Bohemian Rhapsody. So you haven't uploaded it then, because nobody told me that they had uploaded uh, their their uh, their letter to the future students as a song. I mean, I saw a bunch of people had them uploaded, but nobody did it. Mentioned to me they did it as a song. So okay, but I'm going to enjoy reading that while singing Bohemian Rhapsody. 'Cause it doesn't really matter to me. Dun 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 dun. Oh yeah, that brings back memories. Oh man, 'tis killed a man. A few years ago, Fox News had this video of a guy who was totally drunk out of his mind, had been arrested by the cops, put in the back of the cop car, and from beginning to end sang Bohemian Rhapsody in a drunken stupor, but he knew every single word of it. It was hysterical. And I don't say that to encourage drunkenness, because it is a sin. But as long as it's somebody else making a fool of themselves, I'll be willing to laugh at them. And it was funny. Oh my. Anyway, all right. Let's see. Continuing on. Make sure you've memorized the text of the Declaration. It begins with, by the way, so it's not the first paragraph of the Declaration, it's the second paragraph that begins, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and ending with the language, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. That paragraph that I had you memorize is a great biblical summary of the purpose of government and how it's supposed to protect our rights, how rights come from God. It's really, really good. Let's see. There's a video I thought of a kid that did at someone's front door, like an 8-year-old kid. They weren't drunk or arrested. What was he singing Bohemian Rhapsody? Was that the context for this 8-year-old on the front doorstep at Halloween? Just curious. By the way, students in the past have done study groups. I don't know if you guys did that for the midterm. I think generally speaking, the students have found that to be very helpful. I have also put a study guide, which students tell me again is an incredible help in studying. It was only 3 or 4 of you? Okay, well, if it's only 3 or 4, those are the 3 or 4 that get A's, right? Hopefully it helped you a lot. So anyway, you guys feel free to organize that. If I don't know if one of you wants to be the leader on that, give your email address. That's probably the easiest way. And then you can put your email address in the chat box, and then anybody who wants to be a part of it can email you after class and say, hey, let me know about the plans. Yes, I have all your emails, but I'm not organizing the study group. Oh, Julia, I feel sorry for your husband. Funny story. This is a quick story, an aside. A good buddy of mine at church, his wife had just become a Christian when they got engaged. So, she hadn't obviously up to that point spent much time thinking as a Christian or getting a lot of biblical teaching. But anyway, they're at their very first premarital counseling. The pastor said, "Well, I'd like to start off talking about the roles of husband and wife." And so, we talk about submission in this first session, and the wife to be looked at him and said, "I do not like that word." And my buddy was like, "Oh boy, this is going to be good." Anyway, she's grown a lot in the Lord, and now she's fine with the biblical roles of husband and wife. But anyway, it was funny. like, like this means war. Wedding, the wife is the neck, right? And she turns the head wherever she will. Yes, the husband may be the head, but the wife is the neck, and she turns the head whichever direction. That's a pretty funny line, actually. Um, all right. Let's. Any questions about the? It looks like Logan's out there. Logan, by putting your email there, are you putting it there to be the leader of the study group? So everybody should email you, Logan Wing 512. Okay, Julia has all the emails. Okay, great. All right, so Julia's doing that. All right, super. All right, then, let's get to, whoa, didn't mean to, wait, what happened? Oh my, what? This is, oh, there it is. Craziness. It's like, what? All right. Here are the categories for the Jeopardy review. Let's see, I need to, oh, as always, we come up with team names. So why don't you all come up with team names while I write down the names of, I've got to group you guys into two teams, and then we'll pick the team names. So why don't you guys hash that out right now. This pencil's not working very well. Ugh. Alright, I'll deal with it. Alright, let's see. Does anybody need to leave early today? Let's see. A lot of people in class today. It's good. So Donald Trump versus Hillary, George Washington versus Barack, Foxy and Loxy. Oh my. Bernie Sanders versus Hillary. So what do you guys feel like? You want to do Republican versus Democrat, or Democrat, or we could do Trump versus Cruz. Trump Rubio versus Cruz Carson. Benghazi soldiers versus Hillary. Oh my goodness, that is funny. Except I'm just guessing, Logan, there may be people that would object to being on the Hillary team. So Trump versus the world, Mexicans versus Donald Trump. Tell you what, why don't we go with something that is the word I'm looking for, just palatable for everybody. Trump Rubio, or at least for the most people, versus Cruz Carson. How about that? That way, there's 4 people involved. Hopefully, everybody at least has somebody that they like in their team name. So here's the Trump Rubio team. It is Logan, Mark, Daniel, Jaylene, Chloe, and Brooks. So that's the Trump Rubio team. So you guys are the rich ones. Then there's the Cruz Carson team, CC. The Cruz Carson team is Abby, Hannah, Sarah, Harrison, Lizzie, Julia, and Sierra. The money versus the smarts. Interesting. Okay, so if Hannah's keeping score, then how about Brooke? No, how about Mark and Hannah help me keep score? All right. All right. I wouldn't mind having the money and the smarts, right? Okay, so here's the categories. Constitution, questions from the Constitution, questions from the Bible, illustrations. These would have been illustrations used in class, but it could even be illustrations from the book. So that's, and when I say illustrations, I don't mean the artwork, but I mean like examples, right? So miscellaneous could be any category, and then history, questions from history. All right, so let's get this started. Let's see, it's 5:23, so we've got a little under an hour. Let's see if we can get as many questions as possible. Just a reminder, we do, while this is Jeopardy review, I also do a little bit of Family Feud. So if you get a wrong answer, the other team can steal. There's also a daily double. And so with the daily double, there's one, and you can get double the points. I'll explain, but you can also lose points on that one. So that's always a fun one. So we'll, if you pick it, I'll explain it further. So Logan, Abby, Mark, and Hannah, please give me categories and amounts. Oh, and as before, please private chat not only your category and amount, as well as the answers that you give to make sure that I see them. Did you guys hear the pencil sharpener? I had to go sharpen my pencil. All of us for a category? No, just Logan, Abby, Mark, and Hannah. Each of you give me a category and amount. So Hannah said miscellaneous for 500. So that's off the table now. Constitution for 400 from Mark. Abby wants miscellaneous for 200. And how about Logan? Need a category miscellaneous for 100. All right. Guys like the miscellaneous. All right. So miscellaneous. Logan for 100. List 3 of the powers, and by the way, this is only for Logan, and unless you're doing a steal. So this is only for the 4 that I'm asking the question. And you can't obviously search these or look for them on your notes. It's just testing your knowledge as you sit there right now. Okay? So, Logan, list 3 of the powers that Congress has, which are listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. List 3 of the powers that Congress has, which are found in Article 1, Section 8, but beginning with Clause 2. And I say that because, like, Clause 1 says, Congress can borrow money, can promote the general welfare, provide for the common defense, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have, like, from Clause 2 on, like, all these powers. So give me 3 of those powers that began in Clause 2. So that's Logan's question. Abby's question, explain why the FBI did not carry firearms for the first almost 30 years that it was in existence. Why didn't the FBI carry firearms for the first almost 30 years that it was in existence? Hannah, miscellaneous for 500. Hannah, what was the difference between Alexander Hamilton's and James Wilson's opposition to the Bill of Rights? Remember, we discussed and you read about the difference between their opposition to the Bill of Rights between Hamilton and Wilson. Keep in mind that while both were opposed to the Bill of Rights, each one made a slightly different argument. Logan, list 3 of the powers that Congress has, which are listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution after Clause 1. So Article 1, Section 8, beginning in Clause 2 and on. Give me 3 of the powers, and of course you can't look anything up. You know, you can't look at your book or go search. Okay, so just go off of memory here. All right, and then Mark, Constitution for 400. Constitution for 400. Mark, which amendment protects the right to a jury trial? Abby, I'm looking for a clarification. What wasn't permitted? I just want to be clear, because you say it wasn't. Very definitively what you mean by it, okay? Because I want to be clear. All right. Let's see. Daniel and Sarah, you guys don't give me categories and amounts yet, but you be ready to. All right. So that'll be Daniel and Sarah, and then Jaylene and Harrison will be next. But first, we'll get some answers here. Actually, Daniel and Sarah, go ahead and give me a category and amount. Constitution for 300. For Daniel. History for 200. All right. All right. So, Logan, Abby, Mark, and Hannah. Okay, here's Logan. Congressman's powers are borrow money. Okay, well, I said that borrow money was not one that you could include because that's in Section 1, right? But the other 2 were good. So if you want to give me one more, because the other 2 you gave me were good. Okay, so I'll wait to read Logan's full answer. Well, Mark, nice job. Lucky guess. So Mark's question was, which amendment protects the right to a jury trial? He said the 7th Amendment. Actually, you would have gotten the right answer if you said 6th or 7th Amendment you could point to as protecting a right to a jury trial. So that means that's a score for the Trump-Rubio team, 400 points for Trump-Rubio. Nicely done. Okay, raise and support armies. Good. Okay, so Logan's answer, giving me 3 powers that Congress has. He says regulate coin value, or the way it puts it, coins, or that it actually uses. Gosh, it's driving me crazy. Anyway, coins. So produce coins, punish counterfeiters, and raise and support armies. Those are 3 powers that that Congress has. So that's 100 points for Trump-Rubio. So Trump-Rubio's off to a 500-point lead. All right, Abby, let's see. Okay, so Abby says, in answer to the question, why did it take so long for the FBI to carry firearms? Abby said basically several things. They didn't carry firearms because it wasn't permitted in the Constitution. I asked Abby to clarify, and basically Abby was pointing out that Congress only had power over the militia. Now, Abby, you said not over standing armies. technically not true. They do have power to raise an army. However, they did want to dissuade it. They did want to discourage a standing army. So, but you were right in saying they only had power over the militia in terms of enforcing the law. There was no power for, you might say, a standing professional police force. So that's why it took so long for the FBI to actually be given firearms, be allowed to carry firearms and have arrest powers, police powers, etc. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? So anyway, that's 200 points for the Cruz Carson team. Good job, Abby. Hannah, did you answer? I don't see your answer if you did. Okay, here's Hannah's. Okay, Hannah, can you say whose view was whose? Because you said one and the other, but and here I'll put what she said so everybody can read it. Okay, Wilson was opposed because once they saw the Bill of Rights, they would generalize the Constitution without reading. In other words, they think there was power where there was not. The Bill of Rights because it might look like we're. Actually, to me, it sounds like, Hannah, you found different ways of saying the same thing. Sierra, you're on the Cruz Carson team. So I'm going to give you half the points, Hannah, so that I'll give you Cruz Carson 250 points for that. So what you were laying out was Hamilton's position, that to have a Bill of Rights that says, hey, government can't restrict freedom of speech, can't restrict right to keep and bear arms, it would seem to imply that maybe the Congress had power to do that in the first place. And Hamilton's point was they don't have power because they were never delegated the power, because the federal government is one of limited and enumerated powers or delegated powers. And so if they're not given the power, they can't do it. But if you say, oh, by the way, you also can't restrict the freedom of speech, it would seem to imply that, maybe they had more power there after all. So that was Hamilton's view. Wilson's objection was that if you have the Bill of Rights and you don't list everything, then whatever you didn't list is not included or not protected as a right. So that was Wilson's argument. So I didn't see you actually saying Wilson's argument there. Okay, so that's why I'm giving you half the points. Is everybody clear on that? And of course, well, maybe I shouldn't. Let's see. I can't remember if I'm giving away a future question by asking this. No, I'm not. And if I do, then I'll just throw it out. But the two amendments which protect or guard against Wilson's and Hamilton's concerns were the 9th and 10th Amendments. The 9th Amendment guarded against Wilson's concern, and the 10th Amendment guarded against Hamilton's concern. Okay? All right, so right now we've got a close match. Boy, and doesn't this kind of describe what's happening in the Republican Party too? So it's 500 to 450. Trump Rubio over Cruz Carson. Okay. Daniel and Sarah, let me give you your questions, and then Jaylene and Harrison, please give me a category and amount. Daniel, Constitution for 300. What are at least two ways, Daniel, that the Constitution helps prevent the formation of a standing army? Give me at least two ways that the Constitution helps prevent the formation of a standing army. And then Sarah, history for 200. Sarah, name one former president who took a strong stance against the idea that the Supreme Court is the final word on what the Constitution means. Name one former president who took a strong stance against the notion that the Supreme Court is the final word on what the Constitution means. All right, Jaylene gave me history for 500. Swinging for the fences there. And how about you, Harrison? Harrison Ford. Anyway, history for 500. Jaylene, give me two historical examples where juries vetoed bad laws. Give me two historical examples where juries vetoed bad laws. Harrison, are you there? Harrison. I think Harrison left without telling us. Let's see. In answer to Hannah, your question, Abby with the Cruz Carson team answered the miscellaneous for 200 question. He went off solo. Nicely done. Very nice. Yeah. I mean, you can only stoop so low with humor like that, Julia. Indeed. All right, Daniel has an answer. Harrison. Can somebody type Harrison and ask Harrison, can you hear Mr. Or you know what? No, he's still listed there. All right, so Daniel's question was two ways that the Constitution helps prevent the formation of a standing army. And here is Daniel's answer. So, keeping the government from investing funds and using the militia to protect the nation. Yes. So, on the first point, just to be clearer, there's the limitation of funds where every 2 years you have to justify keeping a standing army on foot. And then secondly, giving power over the militia to protect the nation. Man, this got to be a record. So far, everybody's gotten the answer right. Guys are doing great. So that's 300 points for the Trump-Rubio team. I don't know what happened to Harrison. So let's do it this way. Lizzie, give me a category and amount if you would. Bible for 200. All right, great. Let's see, and did Sarah give me an answer? Okay. All right, so here we're going to have our first steal attempt with the Trump-Rubio team. So Logan, Mark, Daniel, Jaylene, Chloe, and Brooks, you can put your collective heads together. Logan, I'll get the final answer from you. But here's the question, okay? I'm going to say it once, and then you guys can discuss it. So I'm going to say it once so y'all listen, because I've already read this a couple times. So here we go. Here's your question to steal for the Trump-Rubio team. Name one former president who took a strong stance against the notion that the Supreme Court is the final word on what the Constitution means. Okay, so that's for the Trump-Rubio team. Logan, you give me the final answer. Private chat it to me. All right. All righty. Jaylene, history for 500. I know you've got to multitask, Jaylene. Sorry about that. I already gave you your question. Then Lizzie, I need to give you your question. Bible for 200. And here we have our daily double. Lizzie, way to go. And actually, this becomes a group answer, which Lizzie will give me the final answer. Okay? Now, Elizabeth, you need to tell me, how much you would like to gamble on this. You can gamble up to 200 points. Okay? Now, here's the deal. So you can gamble 25, 50, 100, increments of 25, basically, up to 200. If you get the answer right, then you actually double however much you gamble. So if you gamble 200 points, you get 400 points. However, if you guys get it wrong, you lose. Let's say if you gamble 200 points, you lose 200 points. Okay? So, can you ask the team? No, you've got to make this decision yourself. So, how much you want to put on the line? Okay, 200 points. Good, swinging for the fences. So, the Cruz Carson team is made up of Abby, Hannah, Sarah, Lizzie, Julia, Sierra, and Harrison. Although Harrison is MIA right now. Harrison, are you back? Harrison, I guess not. All right. Actually, before I give you guys a final answer from you on the question that you guys had to discuss, one former president. Yes, Trump team. Okay, you choose Madison. One former president who took a strong stance against the notion that the Supreme Court is the final word on what the Constitution means. Here's why I'm kind of stumped by this, because he's not a president we discussed in class, but I'm hesitant to say that he didn't take that position. And I'm trying to think if I can think of anything that would support to the contrary or not. I tell you what, I can't think of anything to confirm that answer nor to deny it. So I'm just going to say no points for that question. Here are the three presidents that we actually discussed in class. And I see that you guys actually did throw out some of them. But Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, and Abraham Lincoln were the three, because Thomas Jefferson went toe-to-toe with John Adams over this question. Andrew Jackson, he's the one that famously said, the court has made its decision, now let them enforce it. He actually said Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. So in other words, I'm not going to do anything to in any way enforce the Supreme Court's opinion. And then Abraham Lincoln saying that he wasn't bound by the Dred Scott decision. So those are the three presidents that we discussed, and I would have given you credit for. I just don't know about Madison. So anyway, so no points on that one. So it stays at 800 for Trump and 450 for Cruz Carson, or Trump Rubio, I should say. All right, Jaylene has given me an answer. Jaylene had the question, two historical examples where juries vetoed bad laws. A printer in New York, Jaylene says, criticized the governor, which was illegal at the time, and the governor decided to press charges, but the jury let him off. Good. And then in the 20s, juries refused to convict those charged with breaking prohibition laws, and the laws were eventually repealed. Okay, excellent. So those are the two ones that Jaylene gave. Those are correct answers. Boy, that's a big whopper there, 1,300. So, well, 500 extra brings it up to 1,300. So now it's 1,300 to 450. However, now let me give Lizzie and the whole Cruz Carson team your question so you guys can discuss this for a total of 400 points, although you could lose a couple hundred if you get it wrong. So Abby, Hannah, Sarah, Lizzie, Julia, Sierra, and Harrison, here is your question. Lizzie will give me the final answer. The question is, I need to bring up a slide. After Hurricane Katrina, Judge Andrew Napolitano, which you see on the screen here, authored an article which made the following points. Okay, I'm going to read these 3 points here, and basically as I read these 3 points, I want you to be thinking what scriptures would bolster his points, okay, especially the first 2 points. Welfare, number 1, welfare is the job of individuals, not civil government. Number 2, the federal government should not send federal taxpayers' money to the survivors of hurricanes. And number 3, because President Bush has presided over the greatest increase in spending in American history, now this was before Obama, Judge Napolitano had renamed him as Franklin Delano Bush. All right, I'm not looking for a scriptural support for point number 3, just to be clear, okay? But the real question is, give me 2 scriptures that bolster his point, showing that welfare should be done by individuals, not civil government, or that civil government shouldn't be doing anything and everything, okay? All right, so the question is actually for the Cruz Carson team. You guys can talk about it together. Elizabeth is the one who gives me the final answer, okay? All righty. All right, so with that being said, and you guys having fun doing that, Chloe and Julia, if you would now give me categories and amounts. Oh, and let me go back to there. Constitution for 2, it was not taken. And Julia? History for 400. All right, and now I'll go back to here so you guys can be looking at that. History for 400. Okay. Chloe, here's your question. Constitution for 200. Chloe, what does it mean when the First Amendment says, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion? What does it mean when the First Amendment says respecting an establishment of religion? What kind of law is being prohibited by that specific language in the First Amendment? The specific language which says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's Chloe's question. Now, Julia, hopefully you've already weighed in with Elizabeth, because now here's your question. You have to kind of tear off and pay attention to this. History for 400. What did Alexis de Tocqueville say was the huge difference between France and America on the subject of charity in the 1830s? What did de Tocqueville say was the huge difference between France and America on the subject of charity in the 1830s? That's your question, Julia. And then Brooks and Sierra, could you please give me a category and amount? Brooks and Sierra. Illustrations for 300. Finally, somebody chose illustrations. Whoop, whoop. What else? Brooks? Sorry. Brooks, you had illustrations for 300. And Sierra, so I meant to actually say Sierra. Sierra, what would you like to choose? Constitution for 100. All right. All righty. Back to your slide. Okay. Brooks, here's your question. Illustrations for 300. This is actually an illustration from both the book and class dealing with the Whiskey Rebellion. The Whiskey Rebellion. In the book, you saw that the way that President Washington put down the Whiskey Rebellion in the late 1700s, and we contrasted it, or the book contrasted it, to the way that modern presidents enforce federal law. The way that Washington enforced federal law was very significant. So here's the question, with that as a backdrop. How did Washington put down the Whiskey Rebellion? That is, who did he use to arrest the bad guys? That's your question, Brooks. And then Sierra, here's your question. Sierra missed. Constitution for, I'm sure you've never heard that. Constitution for 100. The Founding Fathers did not believe that the words, quote, promote the general welfare, unquote. The founders did not believe those words gave Congress a blank check to do anything it wanted. So where would you go in the Constitution to see how the founders defined the general welfare? Where would you go? And, okay, Chloe, Constitution for 200, sure. Chloe, what does it mean when the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion? What kind of law is being prohibited by that specific language? And Julia, okay, Julia answering the question, the history question, that is. What did de Tocqueville say was the huge difference between France and America on the subject of charity in the 1830s? Julia says, here, I'll tell you what, here's what Julia said. De Tocqueville said that much of charity in France was funded by the government due to their new socialistic system and yet was not terribly effective, whereas in the U.S., hospitals and the like were funded by private individuals and were far more fruitful in comparison. Good. So 400 points for the Cruz Carson team brings them up to 850 compared to Trump Rubio 1300. All right, any other answers? Harrison, are you back with us? Harrison's not back with us. So strange. All right. Still waiting on Lizzie. Chloe, let's see. Okay, let me go back to Chloe's question just to make sure I get it right. Okay. That's not correct. I'm not going to read what you said because there will be a steal attempt, but I don't want to make it any easier for them by giving them a potentially wrong answer. So just hang on to your hats for a second. All right. Can I get an answer from Elizabeth? The question was, two scriptures that bolster Andrew Napolitano's point that either that welfare should be done by individuals, not the civil government, or that civil government shouldn't be doing anything and everything. Okay? Elizabeth says Matthew 25:40 and Mark 12:1. Okay. What is Matthew 25:40? Let's see. Actually, I've got a Bible right here. Matthew 25:40, which is, the king will reply, tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did it for me. Okay, that's good. So that the context of that is that the righteous were feeding the hungry, were visiting the sick, visiting those who were in prison, taking in the homeless, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, I don't know if does he mention the homeless. Basically, given to eat, given to drink, clothing, kind of suggests homeless. But anyway, I just didn't want to add to the scripture. So okay, that's one good one. And then Mark 12:1. He began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and went away on a journey. Oh, 12:17. Phew, because I was about to ask. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Okay, that is a good one, yes, because it shows that there are some things that belong to Caesar. They do have certain authority, but not everything belongs to Caesar, because some things belong to God and not to Caesar. So that's a verse that shows government's limited authority. So Mark 12:17 and Matthew 25:40. Very good. In fact, I'll put it in with the correct verse. There we go. All right, so that's an extra 400 points for the Cruz Carson team. Man, we're up to a squeaker again. So I have Cruz Carson with 1250, Trump Rubio with 1300. But now here we have a steal attempt, and this could put them over the top. Abby, you're going to give me the final answer. Again, Cruz Carson team, you get to discuss this. So Abby, Hannah, Sarah, Lizzie, Julia, Sierra, and Harrison, you get to discuss this question, which is, what does it mean when the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion? Specifically, what kind of law is being prohibited by that language? Again, the language is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's in the First Amendment. What kind of law is being prohibited by that language? Okay, so Abby, you will give me the final answer. Okay, Brooks and Sierra. I didn't give you your... Well, let's see. No, I gave Brooks a question, right? Find Brooks's question. Oh, okay, yeah. Brooks's question was dealing with the Whiskey Rebellion. Brooks, you still working on that? And then Sierra, did I give you your question? Yes, I did. That dealt with the... Sierra's question was, where would you go in the general welfare? Sierra said Article 1, Section 8. That is correct. So temporarily, Cruz Carson has a narrow lead now at 1350 to 1300. Okay, now Brooks. Okay, and that was, okay, so Brooks did, well, there's already a steal attempt on the floor, so I can't do a second one per rules that I have established ahead of time. But here was the question, and so I'll give you the question and the correct answer. The question regarding the Whiskey Rebellion was this. President Washington put down the Whiskey Rebellion in the late 1700s. The way he enforced federal law was very significant. How did he put down the rebellion? Who did he use to arrest the bad guys? He used the militia of 3 states as opposed to using what a modern day president would probably use, which would be uh, things like uh, IR, well, yeah, IRS, probably IRS, ATF, you know, things like that. Uh, yeah, well, actually, would they use, if the federal government was doing it, they probably wouldn't use the state police force, although maybe arguably there might be a multi-jurisdictional task force. But if it's the federal government doing, they're probably going to use FBI, IRS, Homeland Security. You know that. In other words, that's the idea there. Okay. All right. All right. We got 13 minutes left. Cruz Carson is narrowly in the lead. We're going to be waiting for a final answer from Abby. Oh, your answer is in. Let me. I didn't. Oh, you didn't private chat it to me. Naughty, naughty. You have to private chat it so I know that it's your final answer. All right. So again, the question was. Um, question was. Trying to find it here. Question was, what does it mean when the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion? The Cruz Carson team says that means it's limiting the power of making a law that could establish a national religion, but specifically a national denomination. Yes, that was what was being prohibited. It was prohibiting the establishment of a denomination as the official church of the whole country. Now, notice, it wasn't supposed to stop a state from doing that. States could do that and were doing that at the time. Now, I realize that's not the way it's interpreted today, okay? But at the time, it was only a limitation on the federal government establishing one particular denomination for the entire country. But like Maryland was a Catholic state, Virginia was Anglican, et cetera, et cetera. So they just didn't want the federal government to decide that. Okay, so that means half the points go to Cruz Carson. That means it is 1450 now, because that was 100 points, half the points. 1450 to 1300. Are my scorers tracking with that, and does that sound right? All right, so we have about 10 minutes left. Let's go back to let's do this. For these, at least the next couple rounds, you can only, since we've had a lot of questions selected from Constitution, Bible, and History, Mark and Hannah, give me a category and amount only from the Bible and illustrations columns. So Mark and Hannah, category and amount only from Bible and illustrations. Illustrations for 500 for Mark. Mark wants to make sure the Trump-Rubio team wins. 100 illustrations for 400. All right, so Daniel and Sarah give me categories amount, but only from the Bible category. Only from the Bible category. So Bible for 300 for Sarah. Oh, Daniel, try again. I think that's the sound they make, right? Bible for 100. All right. Okay, here we go. First, the illustration questions. Mark for 500. Mark, do you remember the paper checks example? The book talked about paper checks. We talked about it in class. Paper checks are checks and balances that are written down on paper. They're the words on paper, right? Well, explain what are their limitations and how the founding fathers overcame their shortcomings. So what was their limitation? I mean, they're good, they're useful, checks and balances are useful, but what are their limitations and how did the founders overcome their shortcomings? Hannah, illustration for 400. Tell me about the day that the government class went to the dogs. I'm barking up the wrong tree, I'm sure. The Doberman illustration. Please explain the Doberman example. What was the point made by using the Doberman illustration? The Doberman illustration. And then Daniel, Bible for 100. Daniel, in Luke 22, Jesus told his disciples that if they didn't have one of these items, they should sell their cloak and buy one. What was the item? And then Sarah, Bible for 300. All right. Sarah, here's your question. There are 4 limitations placed upon the king in Deuteronomy 17. 3 of the limitations made it into the U.S. Constitution. You see the passage there in front of you. What are the 3 limitations that are found in the U.S. Constitution? Limitations that were based upon this passage. So I'm actually looking for the 3 limitations that are in the Constitution, but your memory should be jogged by looking at this passage because in principle they had their basis in this passage. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so there's 4 questions out there. Because we're short on time, no steal attempts at this point. Okay, no more steal attempts. So you either get the right answer or you don't. Jaylene wants to go again. Well, if we get through these 4, yes, you can go again. Tell you what, Jaylene and Lizzie. I tell you what, Sarah, can you make a quick snapshot of this slide so you can look at it, keep looking at it? And that way I can go to, okay, great. Jaylene and Lizzie, you can pick anywhere on the board. Elizabeth for illustrations for 100. Jaylene wants Constitution for 500. Wow, these Trump people really want to win. All right. Jaylene, Constitution for 500. Jaylene, what's the specific protection in the Bill of Rights that guards against unlawful searches and seizures? Now, no fair looking up, okay? What specific protection in the Bill of Rights? In the Bill of Rights that protects seizures? Lizzie. This semester, we discussed the Bill of Rights, including the Second Amendment right. And during that class on the Second Amendment, which was last week, I illustrated the importance of this right by looking at a historical account from the country of Cambodia in the 1970s. You also saw a video on it. What happened in Cambodia, and how does this example demonstrate the importance of our rights protected in the Second Amendment? So 2 things there. What happened in Cambodia, and how does this show the importance of our rights which are protected in the Second Amendment? So those are the 2 things I'm looking for. Okay, Mark has an answer. Illustrations for 500. When we talked about the paper checks, what are their limitations and how did the founders overcome their shortcomings? Okay, first off, Limitations were that a piece of paper couldn't enforce the law no matter how many reams of laws there are. So the founders overcame this by making the branches of government interconnected and dependent upon each other so that they are inherently limited. Okay, Mark, what you did was you gave me a check and balance. Okay, so these are one of the checks and balances that are written down on paper, and that's why, I want to make clear the checks and balances are important, and having that interplay, the check and balance between the legislative branch and the president, that's all very important, and the courts as well. But, and so bottom line, you didn't get the answer right, and now I'm going to give you the answer. Bottom line, all of those checks and balances in the world don't stop a president, if he's got all the guns with the military, from just saying, I'm in charge. So what was the ultimate way to overcome their shortcomings? Two things. They limited the power of the military by reducing, the need for it, yada, yada, and they protected the right of Americans to be armed. So basically, they reduced the actual power that government can have. Mao Zedong, and I know he wasn't alive yet when the founders were alive, but Mao Zedong said that power flows from the barrel of a gun. The founders understood that, even though that quote hadn't been made yet. So they actually limited the number of guns in government's hands, and they protected the right of the people to be armed. Okay, so that answers that question. Hey, no problem. That's a tough one. That's why it's a 500 pointer. So don't feel bad. All right, let's see. Jaylene says the Fourth Amendment. That is correct. The amendment which protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. So that's 500 points for Trump Rubio. That could be a game changer right there. All right. Jesus told his disciples to sell their cloaks. Okay, but that was not the question. Because the question was, in selling their cloaks, what were they supposed to buy? So that one, no points for that one. What did he tell them to buy? He told them to buy a sword. Buy a sword. Okay, Hannah, Sarah, and Lizzie. Let's see. Interesting. Because right now it's 1800 to 1450. If all three of you get your answers right, you will overtake the Trump Rubio team. Okay. Okay, and we're down to 1 minute left. In Cambodia, the people were first stripped of their guns and then killed later on. And because they were first stripped of their guns, it's important to keep ours so that the government doesn't have all the physical force and take over. Okay, so that explains, yes, the question about Cambodia, the illustration about the Khmer Rouge. What happened in Cambodia demonstrates the importance of our Second Amendment rights. So that's 100 points for Cruz Carson. They're now 100 points closer. They're up to 1550 versus 1800 for Trump Rubio. So now we need Sarah and Hannah. Okay, Sarah's given me one answer. And Sarah's answering the question, what were the three things that are in our Constitution that are based on Deuteronomy 17? One, she said, was that the president has to be born in America. In fact, if you've been watching the news, there's been discussion about that in relation to Cruz. Actually, just to be technical, it doesn't say born in America. The Constitution says a natural-born citizen, and there is actually a distinction on that. So it's not technically necessarily being born in America because other people people haven't questioned have been like John McCain wasn't born in America, yet nobody questioned the fact that he was a natural-born citizen. But not even naturalized, because like my mom was naturalized, but she was not born, she was not a natural Panama. My mom could never be president of the United States, even though she's a naturalized citizen. Basically, you have to be born either in the country or born of U.S. parents to be a natural born citizen. And since Cruz was born to an American mom, that's why people who support Cruz's candidacy say, no, he was a natural born citizen. He never had to file papers to become an American citizen. He was natural born. Okay, so that means, let's see, Sarah gets so far 1/3 of the points, so that's 100 points. So they're up to 1650. We're inching along here. Hannah, do I have an answer from you? We're running out of time. On the Doberman. Here's the Doberman example. The bigger dog represents here, I'll just print it here. Big police force, while a smaller dog represents a militia. The downside of a big dog is when the police force gains too much power and begins storming in innocent people's houses, causing riots, and basically having more power of the average individual, taking away our freedoms. The small dog militia would be everywhere, giving each citizen the same power as each other, weeding out the criminals since they are everywhere, and keeping our freedom at the same time. You know, you've actually expanded on my illustration. Do you realize that? Because there was only one dog. It was one big dog. But you've now done like a go dog go. There's the big dogs and little dogs. And do you like my hat? No, I do not like your hat. Do you get extra points? No, you don't get extra points, but I will give you the points for your answer. So that brings you up to 2050. That means Cruz Carson is now in the lead, and it doesn't matter what Sarah says. If a militia is a chihuahua. But anyway, yeah, that was the point of the Doberman. That you know, with the Doberman, as long as you have the dog there, there's no way realistically to keep it from attacking the kids. The best way to protect the kids is to get rid of the Doberman, and that's what our founders did. They got rid of the Doberman, so to speak. They said no standing police forces, federal police forces, and no permanent army. Okay? Now, back to Sarah's question. The other two that you could have answered, so one was he has to be from among your own brothers, that one right there, a fellow Israelite. Another one was not acquire great numbers of horses. That's a limitation on the military, right? A limitation on the funding that we have in our Constitution, and not accumulating large amounts of silver and gold. And there were many ways, 3 ways that I laid out that our Constitution prevents the federal government